All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our first Combined Issues and Insights and Public Policy South Metro program. My name is Grace Waltz. I am the Vice President of Public Policy for the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. A few housekeeping items this morning. As you enter the meeting, all attendees will have audio and video muted. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your toolbar for questions to be considered by our speakers, and you can also communicate with hosts using the chat function. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording in your post-event email. I want to take a moment before we get started to thank our sponsors. We appreciate their support. Our presenting sponsor is TCF Bank. Our premier sponsor is CenterPoint Energy. Our supporting sponsors are Donaldson, Goff Public, MRA Management Association, Weber Johnson, and Wells Fargo. And our media partner is Finance and Commerce. And before we get started, we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, and Chris Duffy from Goff Public has a few words to share with us. So I will hand it off to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Grace, and happy Friday morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Goff Public historically likes to sponsor events where important conversations are happening, and today is absolutely no exception. We are proud members of the Minneapolis Chamber and pride ourselves on being active members and are really excited about the conversation today. Just a really quick little snippet on Goff Public. We are celebrating 55 years in business this year. We are a communications firm in downtown St. Paul. We're really excited to return to the office on July 1st for 3 days a week and then working home 2 days a week for the very long term. We have clients from pretty much every industry, and we are in the business of reputation, whether that be from a proactive, positive perspective or a reactive crisis situation. And we help our clients try to win that never-ending battle for attention in a very divisive world these days. So it's a very interesting time to be in public relations and lobbying, and really happy to be the sponsor of today's event. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to the event.
Thanks so much, Chris. We're going to move on to our legislator question of the day. And I think Representative Morrison, you unfortunately get to carry the water on this whole question. So we're going to kick it off with you. And I think everyone would like to hear kind of where we're at with the budget process right now and your view on the progress towards a budget being completed at the end of the month.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks for including legislators in this conversation. I'm glad to be here this morning. Well, I think it's fair to say that we're all a bit frustrated at this point. It's been a long and trying year for our state, and everyone's looking for some relief. But we're living through a moment that our grandchildren will study in the history books. We have big challenges to tackle. And in the context of the only divided legislature in the country, that's not an easy task. But I do think we can all agree that we would benefit from more transparency in the end of session negotiation process. And that's really an area that I think we need process reform. For example, I served on the Environment and Natural Resources Conference Committee. And multiple times our Senate counterparts just didn't show up. And that just shouldn't be acceptable. That forces the process behind closed doors, where bills that haven't even been vetted or had a hearing are slipped into the final omnibus. Having said that, though, we had a divided legislature last session, and what was also a very heated political moment, and we got a lot of good work and policy done. So I think we have reason to be hopeful. But when the dust settles this year, I really think it's in everyone's best interest to reform the process so that Minnesotans understand clearly how their elected officials craft the final budget.
Thank you for that. And I see we were joined by Representative Joachim as well, so I'll pass it off to her. Would just love to hear from you where you think we're at with the budget process and the prospects of getting a budget done by the end of the month.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm a little late. I'm Cheryl Joachim from Hopkins in St. Louis Park. I think I want to be very positive about this. I think we're going to get done by the end of the month. I think we all know what's at stake, especially with the Supreme Court ruling during the Dayton administration and the question about whether or not the lower courts can actually appropriate money if we do go into a shutdown. That, and I think there has been a spirit of trying to work together across the aisle, make compromises, and we always knew it was going to be a little rocky. We are the only divided legislature in the country, and we can do this the Minnesota way and figure out how to come together and show people how it can get done. That being said, there are some very good policies on both sides of the aisle that people are really wanting to get passed. Our structure is set up for incremental change when we go into close to shutdown like this or status quo, and that's getting frustrating for a lot of people. So hopefully people can dig deep and realize that we have some policy issues that need to be taken care of. We can't keep kicking them down the road, and actually come to the table and talk. That being said, I wish it would have been a little bit more transparent of a process. I think having COVID hit and pivoting to virtual and then trying to go in and slowly open back up has been a little bit tougher to have that process being transparent. I'm looking forward to June 14th being more open, and then looking forward to next year as well. There's just something about talking with folks eye to eye that gets things moving a little bit faster. So just want to thank all of those who are involved, including the business community, who has been very vocal at the table all the way through session and during conference committees to help us realize what we can do to help those that have been hit hardest by COVID really get past this and move on and hopefully have our economy bounce back a little bit faster. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for your insights, and we so appreciate the work that you do for us in St. Paul, particularly in this challenging year that we've all been facing. So now I'm going to introduce our moderator for this morning, Jonathan Weinhagen, who is President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, who is then going to introduce Congressman Phillips and moderate our conversation this morning. So Jonathan, I will kick it to you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Representatives Morrison and Joachim, for your insights into the end of session, as well as the good work that you've been doing. It's been a great partnership with you as we've moved through another challenging legislative session, but I think that I share your optimism, Representative Joachim, that we can get to some sort of a shared resolution. I know Congressman Phillips is leading the charge on that front in a divided environment in our federal government. Grateful to be with all of you this morning and excited to welcome our speaker this morning. Before I do that, I will share that my team questioned my choice of being outside in the heat that we've been having. If my dry cleaner is watching, you can be happy to know that I'll be sending in the sport coat because it will be in need of some service at the end of this program. As I mentioned, I get the honor of introducing Congressman Dean Phillips. Dean was raised in Edina and is a Gold Star son who lost his father, his birth father, Artie, in the Vietnam War. Dean was adopted into the Phillips family when his mother, Dee Dee, married Eddie Phillips, who raised Dean to work hard and always share his success. And I think that we've all seen that across his career and continue to see that spirit in him as he does his work on behalf of his district. Dean attended Brown University before returning to Minnesota to earn his MBA at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Business. Then after working at a variety of small startups, he joined the family business, Phillips Distilling, where he worked his way up and eventually led the company. He later went on to help build Talenti Gelato into one of the top-selling ice cream brands in the company and is now co-owner of Penny's Coffee. I'd pause for a moment to say, like, Dean has found a way to marry all of the things that I love, right? Distilling, coffee, ice cream, and politics. So like, I feel like you're on a great track here, Congressman. He is, I mentioned he's the co-owner of Penny's Coffee. He's active in his family's foundation, the Phillips Family Foundation, and was elected to represent Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District in 2018. Serves as the vice chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. We're going to talk about that today, and I know he will mention that, as well as serving on the House Ethics, Small Business, and Foreign Affairs Committees. and as well as the Select Committee on Modernization of Congress. So with no further ado, good morning, Congressman. We are grateful to have you and look forward to your insights, and then what I think will be a robust discussion between the two of us. But as importantly, we'd encourage folks to put questions into the Q&A so that we can cover a myriad of topics. No shortage of issues and things that we want to discuss this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Jonathan, and thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Jonathan, perhaps you can share with me some of your other loves so I know what my next career will be, so I can get to work on that. Anyway, welcome, everybody. Happy to be with you, honored to be with you. And before I begin, I want to go backwards a little bit. My great-grandfather, J. Phillips, was president of the Minneapolis Chamber 60 years ago in 1961. Just found his going away address right here from June 13th of 1962. And I read through it this morning and wanted to share a few elements of it. The overarching message he was sending is that 1961 represented Minneapolis becoming a major league city, literally. The Minnesota Vikings started play, the Minnesota Twins came to town, and there was a feeling of optimism, a bright future, and the hopefulness that I know we all strive for and aspire to. And as I reflect on the membership of the chamber, Jonathan, your leadership of it, I like going backwards before we go forwards. You know, we're facing a difficult time right now. I don't need to tell all of you that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But all of you give me hope. The chamber gives me hope. The economic engine that is the Twin Cities and Minneapolis in particular gives me hope as well. But we got to work together. No matter your politics, no matter your background, no matter your perspective, and no matter your industry, because the ecosystem that we create here economically and socially and otherwise, culturally, is the arbiter of our future. And we've got great competition, not just with other American cities, of course, but with the world. But I know that's in good hands, and I want to express how grateful I am to all of you. Many of you know I ran for Congress because of frustration, and I had raised my daughters to be participants, not observers. In 2016, after that presidential election, I thought that was the time to participate. I saw how fragile our democracy can be, was becoming, and was so deeply troubled and continue to be by the lack of thoughtful discourse, respect, understanding, listening by members of Congress, and a political industrial complex, a duopoly, if you will, that is far more focused on a fight to the bottom than a rise to the top by working together. So my overarching mission is to preserve the democratic republic, to be forthright, to inspire common sense solutions, and promote bipartisan cooperation. Pretty fundamental aspirations. And I ask for your support in that effort and invite you to be participants in inspiring other members of Congress to join that. And more broadly, my work on the Modernization Committee is very intentional. It's a select committee comprised of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. And I wish to address the physical design shortcomings of Congress, the social design shortcomings of Congress, and the organizational design shortcomings. All of you who work in enterprises, be they for-profit or nonprofit, would be dismayed by the design of our most important legislative institution. And without people committed to working together, developing a plan, a strategy, an approach, a shared mission, and then getting to it, pursuing it, it's going to be very problematic. And I know our founders designed an extraordinary system of governance. I don't want to change much about it, but the rules by which it operates makes change so difficult that I do believe that even they would be disappointed in it. And that is my aspiration, is to find paths to do better so that we don't cede leadership of the entire globe to emerging powers like China and others. And that is perhaps the greatest call to action I could issue to all of us as we contemplate where we want to go as a country. The here and now, clearly, we're focused on recovery from COVID. And many of you probably are seeing inflation, supply chain issues, labor crunches. I'm well aware of it personally, and every business I've been visiting during my stay back at home for the last couple of weeks has affirmed those beliefs. And it's a little bit of a paradox, obviously. But we are working hard to address these issues. You're all aware of the American Rescue Plan, and ongoing efforts for COVID relief. We have the Restaurant Recovery Fund for those of you in hospitality. I just sponsored the RRF, Restaurant Recovery Fund Fairness Act. We want to replenish that fund, working with Republicans to ensure that there's enough oversight and accountability to reduce fraud, that we can refill those coffers. We have the SVOG, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program for stages and theaters and the like. Those funds have still not been released after months. So we are imploring that the SBA expeditiously release those. Gyms and fitness centers have struggled, of course, any place that required public gathering. And many were left out of these relief programs. So we're looking at ways to perhaps expand the parameters of the existing programs to support more industries. And beyond that, I'm increasingly focused on ensuring that capitalism doesn't just survive, but thrives. And I think the path to do so is to be more inclusive and more intentional about sharing the successes of capitalism. That doesn't mean a revolution, it simply means an evolution. In fact, I want to prevent the former in favor of the latter. I'm sponsoring a number of bills that we've written as a team to do that, to inspire more entrepreneurship, ensure that capital provision is more available to more people in this country, specifically in the heartland and communities of color and women-owned enterprises. We have the Ignite American Innovation Act, the new Business Preservation Act that we are starting today, right after this call. I'll be joined by colleagues, including former CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, in introducing the Congressional Compassionate Capitalism Caucus, 4 Cs. I want to inspire Democrats and Republicans not to allow the condemnation of capitalism, rather focus on how we can make it work for more people, inspire more economic activity, more ownership, and more sharing of success. And as a member of the Small Business Committee, I'm also leading an effort to identify a path forward on minimum wage. Of course, I recognize the difference between a livable wage and the minimum wage, different issues, different components, and also how to address this labor shortage. Clearly, the amplified federal benefit is playing a role. Massive number of retirements, people who are not coming back to work, no matter what compensation might exist, is reality. And we've got to ensure that we've got the people to make this economic engine hum. And if any of you have thoughts on these subjects, by all means, I hope you'll share them with me as well. Lastly, infrastructure. It's a broken record. I know every week you all see the same updates. They're close to a deal. Bipartisan talks are starting, they're stopping. The fact of the matter is it's just confounding. We should all agree that we need to invest in America's infrastructure. We are ceding leadership to other countries around the world in so many ways. I believe it's incumbent on the Congress to pass a meaningful bill. We have a lot of agreement on what we need to do. The divergence of opinion occurs where we have to decide how to pay for it. And I believe we should start paying for things. The incremental use of our debt to fund projects, programs, and relief in the short term is fine, especially in a low interest, almost zero interest rate environment. But when we have inflation, which we're starting to see, when we have an interest rate spike, which is eventually inevitable, that $450 billion a year or so that we now spend on our debt service is going to skyrocket and increasingly crowd out the very investments we need to make to be competitive. So the infrastructure bill that we're working on in the Problem Solvers Caucus, a $1.2 trillion proposition generated by 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans, is a darn good start. And in the absence of the ability of senior leaders to come to the table, negotiate in good faith and pass a bill, I'm proud of the Problem Solvers for constantly offering an alternative, a path forward that could generate the votes necessary to pass a bill, even if it disappoints people in both parties. That's typically when you've got a good compromise. Transit is a huge component of that, $23 billion or so per year over 8 years for public transit, simply amplifying the federal share of that investment, which is about 36% nationally right now. And I'm still hopeful and optimistic. It's not easy. I didn't take the job or pursue it because I thought it would be. It's a lot more difficult than I expected, of course, but we're going to keep the faith and keep pushing and find some ways forward. Lastly, I want to talk about public safety. I own, with my family, a building in downtown Minneapolis. We've had a presence in Northeast Minneapolis, our family enterprise, since 1933, going up close to a century. My mother lives downtown. My brother lives downtown. I own a business that operates downtown. And any of you who are paying attention, I know you all are, share my concerns about lawlessness, the boldness of daylight shootings and drag races and violence that are increasingly consuming our city, creating fear, and in my estimation, pose a great risk to our economic and cultural and social future. So I want you to know I'm mindful of it. I've been visiting every police department in my district in the last week. I visited with just about every police chief and rank and file officers. Visited the Hennepin County Sheriff, did a ride along with Hennepin County EMS about a month ago. I'm really diving into identifying how our first responders, what they're being called to do, how they're handling it, the resources that they have that they don't have, and trying to identify solutions to a problem that we still have time to rectify, but have to get to it. And I ask you to join me in that effort. Share your ideas, not just your condemnations, I know what those are, but how we can do better, because I see what happens when police departments are ill-equipped, under-resourced, when culture diminishes. We see what we're getting right now. We can be pro-law enforcement and pro-justice. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, I would argue that they very much work hand in hand. And no group can better lead that effort in a thoughtful, principled, and effective manner than all of you. And I call attention to it for reasons you surely recognize, and I invite you to be at the table as we try to maintain the extraordinary platform for business that is the Twin Cities. So with that, Jonathan, I think I'll yield back to you, and we'll start a Q&A. And most of all, feel free to ask anything that's on your minds. Nothing is off limits. I love to be challenged. I want to hear your ideas. And most of all, thank you. I'm grateful to be with you.
Thank you, Congressman, and looking forward to our conversation here and to all the questions that are already coming in. And I've got some that I know that we share with your team earlier, and you've touched on a lot of the areas, but I want to dig deeper into so many of the things that you've highlighted this morning. First, I'll start by saying I think your next endeavor is probably in chocolatiering, so you might want to watch Willy Wonka over the weekend, get some insights, because that would be another thing on my bucket list. Maybe it could be a shared endeavor, so we can talk about that offline.
I don't have to watch it. I live in Wonka land every day. It's just so we have no chocolate.
Perfect. So one of the things that I think regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, that many of us in the Twin Cities have admired about you and your leadership is the fact that you do have this practical business experience, whether it's an established family company, the startup environment. You've lived and breathed and experienced being a business owner, making a payroll. We always talk about that as a really important, not just validator, but experience for leaders who we ask to do the work that you're doing in Congress. We've seen the impact that the pandemic has had on our small business community, a community that the chamber, since 1961, when your grandfather was the president or the chair of the organization, has been as the backbone of this economy. We know that 47% of employment in the Twin Cities is employed with companies that employ 100 people or less, and disproportionately 50 people or less. So we're talking about a small business ecosystem that creates a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities. You and I have had a lot of conversations over the course of the last year with regards to the need for support and stimulus, and the CARES Act was a great program, and the PPP had its faults, but served a really important role over the course of the last 15 months. Interested in your thinking, and you've been, I would tell you, a great champion around bringing kind of the practical approach to these programs and how they get implemented, and how they support the ecosystem, and then how we think about the forgiveness process. So I would love your thoughts, and I know that our members would, with regards to how are you pushing on the PPP program, obviously exhausted from a funding standpoint, but now we're into the forgiveness on the first and second phase of the program. You talked a little bit about the revitalization fund for restaurants and a fairness act. So I think kind of that consistent theme of these programs are great, and there's a lot of layers of paperwork and bureaucracy and other things as we think about actually realizing what these programs were meant to do. So would love your thoughts on that. I know that I kind of asked you 8 questions in there. So to the best of your ability, answer as many of them, and I'll come back to you if we miss anything.
I will, Jonathan. Well, legislation is analogous to creating a product and marketing it, distributing it, selling it, promoting it. And the product in Congress is our bills, legislative bills. And but all too often bills are passed and monies are distributed, and then members of Congress kind of wipe their hands of it. Once it launches, it's out there, and that's that. But you all know in businesses that create products that you have to constantly improve them. You have to assess their features and benefits, if there are deficiencies, correct them, amplify the good. And we have to do that with every program and every bill, I think, that we pass in Congress. I think that's assessing how a policy works and course correcting is integral to success. And we don't do that very well in Congress. So on a broad basis, I'd like to see more of that. Relative to the programs we've launched, I'm trying to do that. PPP is a great example. I think it did a remarkably important job of keeping lights on, keeping people paid. Remember, this was the Paycheck Protection Program, not the Business Protection Program. Wanted to keep people on the payroll. And those of you who secured funds, I think you would agree it helped do so. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. We had to rely, of course, on intermediaries, the banking system. Those of you who had good relationships probably got resources quickly. Those of you who didn't may have struggled. Our Minnesota community banks stepped up in a huge way. I'm proud of that, and want to salute their wonderful work. But to give you an example, I thought the requirement relative to the portion of PPP that was required for payroll was simply too high, because not all businesses are created equal. Lots of other expenses, and if the objective was to keep people paid but also keep the lights on, we had to modify it. So I'm the 12th most bipartisan member of Congress. I worked with Chip Roy, my conservative Republican friend from Texas, on the PPP Flexibility Act, which is a great example of how we can course correct. We work together, strange bedfellows, but on a unified mission to do better for small business. We changed the requirements, made the program a lot more flexible. Probably many of you benefited from it. And it all came from listening. Many of you shared input, chamber members, and Chip heard the same thing in his district. We need to do that with every single program, whether it's the SVOG program or the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and for that matter, any policy we issue. That's why when the Restaurant Revitalization Fund was oversubscribed almost immediately, many of us started calling for a replenishment. Our Republican friends say there's too much fraud. So there was an impasse. So I created a bill, the Fairness Act, to simply ensure that the SBA has an oversight and accountability plan to ensure that my Republican colleagues have confidence in it and more funds can be allocated. That's how we should all be doing things, finding a bridge to rectify gaps in perspective. And with that, so Jonathan, as a broad stroke, that's what we need to do. I think, I won't confirm, but I think we have exhausted our abilities and intentions to distribute resources into this economy. As we're seeing some inflationary pressures, as we're seeing a relative economic boom, as I talk to everything from plastic injection molders to other vendors and hear about how deep their order sheets are right now, I think we're in for quite a boom. So the question is how all these dollars that we've injected into this economy, how they're going to flow. Savings are up, pent-up demand is about to be unleashed. So we're going to see how things work before we create any new programs. There was extraordinary fraud. I have to confess, it's deeply troublesome. But when you inject $1 trillion or so into an economy that is in desperate need of it, the sad truth is there is going to be fraud. But it is incumbent on government to reduce it to as low as possible and ensure that those criminals who violate and abuse the system, taxpayer dollars, are pursued. I will close, though, Jonathan, on the subject by saying, we've got almost a $30 trillion federal debt right now, and growing. Our debt service is going to approach $500 billion a year, which is $500 billion that we are not spending on roads, on education, on health, on early childhood support, family support, and ensuring that we're competitive. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, and I think we all will bear some responsibility to ensuring that our children and their children have as bright of a future as we've been blessed with ourselves. So that's my 2 cents, well, more than 2 cents on a very complicated subject.
Appreciate that. I mean, you talked about this maybe being a bit of the end of the road for federal stimulus, but it's a little bit of the beginning of the road for how we're going to deploy those resources. Communities all across the country, certainly here in the state of Minnesota, including the state and our counties and our cities, just last month received their first allotment of American Rescue Plan dollars. So I'd be interested in kind of your expanded thoughts on two things. One, how you envision those dollars helping us build into an economic recovery that, I mean, to your earlier point, I agree. I think we're headed towards a boom time. And I think if we leverage these dollars right, we can turn, the billions of dollars into, a multiple of that. But also advice that you might have to communities, whether it's in your district or across the state, as they think about deploying these dollars. Obviously, I think Congress had an intent that there's a gap stop component to them. And as we talk to local cities and jurisdictions, there's absolutely a need to fill the hole that was created by the lack of parking revenues and water revenues and different kind of nuts and bolts aspects of how local government is funded. And there's this incredible opportunity to leverage these resources into the future. So I'd be interested in your thinking about how you would advise your cities, your counties, your state to leverage these dollars moving forward. And I would just preface that by saying we're having a lot of conversations, and I am super optimistic about the coordinated approach that Minnesota is going to take on this, that the Twin Cities is going to take. It shouldn't and doesn't surprise any of us, but I think we can outpace the rest of the country with regards to how we leverage these federal dollars into the future.
And I agree, Jonathan. I'm not going to be so bold as to advise our municipalities how to spend their resources. I think that's only going to get me in trouble. And it's clear, you all know that every community, every municipality, city, town, village has different needs, has different tax bases, expectations of its citizenry, and the effects of COVID were quite different on different cities in different parts of the country and even within Minnesota. What's been a surprise, I will tell you all, is that when we allocated these resources, I never imagined, very few of us did, that tax receipts at the state and local level would be as strong as they are. You just saw the Minnesota report, rather remarkable, which is makes me optimistic, but makes me also realize that things may not have been as bad as they were. But the monies have been allocated. They are in distribution and going to be deployed here, and in fact, in many cases are. I want to see investments, things that will enhance our culture, our social connections, our communities, our infrastructure, and the ability of businesses to succeed. And that means a lot of things. That means more livable communities. We want to attract people to Minnesota. We want to attract investment to Minnesota. And there are lots of ways to do so. I have great faith in local and state leadership to allocate resources in the way they see fit. But I'd be remiss, Jonathan, if I didn't talk about how we were very intentional too about trying to elevate the foundation from which so many families struggle in Minnesota and around the country. From the earned income tax credit to the child tax credit to direct payments, emergency financial assistance, and rental assistance. We've got a staggering and growing discrepancy in resources in America. And I want to find ways for our society, for you business owners and members and all of us working together to find ways for more people to participate. And I want to see our communities use dollars to stimulate that. And I think that means promoting entrepreneurship, ensuring that there are spaces and places and the labor supply to accommodate that, and capital so that we can fuel people's dreams. And when I voted yes on these programs, I did so with that very intention, to ensure that more people can participate. It's an imperfect science, if it is a science at all, more of an art. But in overarching terms, that's my disposition. And I also remind you all, when the federal government steps in with a stimulus package like that to support our state and many others around the country, that's debt. It means that we didn't get a tax increase perhaps here in Minnesota, but now our credit card debt has gone up exponentially. And at the end of the day, there is no free money. At least I don't believe there is. Some around the world believe in modern monetary theory, that it just doesn't matter. Cryptocurrencies will certainly be playing a role in this question. But in the meantime, debt is debt, and it eliminates and reduces other ways that we should be investing resources. So I want to be cognizant of the near term versus the long term.
Thank you for that. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about public safety. You mentioned it in your opening remarks, having a long history, 1943 with property in North Minneapolis, family that lives downtown. I think we're all hearing these concerns, and those concerns extend far beyond the boundaries of downtown or the city of Minneapolis. We've experienced, the tragic events in Brooklyn Center. What happened to George Floyd with his murder should have never happened. What happened to Dante Wright should have never happened. I wish that I could sit with you and say we couldn't have predicted this. I think the reality is history would tell us, and you reminded us that history is a good predictor of future actions. We could have predicted it, and I think we can predict it into the future. And there's a lot of work to do on public safety with regards to the continuum of public safety. I would tell you, beyond policing, we know that there are many dynamics up to and including what you just talked about with regards to building an economy that works for more people, that creates less despair, that creates more opportunity, that is more inclusive, but also a need for traditional law enforcement, but a law enforcement agency that is more just and more equitable and doing things in a different way. So I'm really interested, because you've been an important voice on police reform nationally, in your thoughts about where we are and where we're headed. A lot of us are tracking the George Floyd Act, which is kind of, I would say, moving through Congress, but you might say is stalled in Congress. So I'd love your thinking on where are we at, what do we need to be doing, and how can this business community, where I would tell you, Congressman, I think there's a shared feeling of responsibility, given the events of the last year and what happened here, to really be leaders as we think about reform into the future, and as we recognize the economic impact that public safety has across our communities, on our economy.
Well, Jonathan, none of us would have imagined that 2 years ago that Minneapolis would be the center of this entire discussion, not just nationally, but internationally. But those of you who've been in this community for long enough will know that the Minneapolis Police Department has long had a cultural issue. And sadly, that has cast a shadow on law enforcement nationally and throughout the district I represent, the 3rd District, which I believe have well-led, principled law enforcement agencies with good cultures, imperfect, of course, as any institution or organization is, but I'm proud of them. And there are multiple truths. One of them is we need to pursue justice. Too many communities have been subject to over-policing, discrimination, and it's appalling. And I have great empathy and support for those who are calling for reform. Most of the police chiefs I speak with agree we need to address some of these issues. They are as appalled as anybody by what happened to George Floyd and Dante Wright. And they say nobody hates a bad cop more than the good cops, and I do believe That said, we have a culture, a history, a tradition of police in America that is upsetting to many, for reasons I think we can all understand. And I think it is time for evolution as it relates to law enforcement and policing, because I think we're seeing what happens when police are under-supported, under-resourced, understaffed. And if that's the future that Minnesotans want, I think we're seeing very vividly how it looks, and it's not pretty. And by the way, the communities that are calling the loudest for more support and more safety and more security are actually our communities of color. Don and Sandra Samuels in North Minneapolis are speaking as loudly and yelling as loudly as they possibly can, so that North Minneapolis is not ignored. I mean, in some evenings, it is a war zone. We have 3 children were shot, for goodness sakes, last month. 2 of them died. I'm really troubled. I'm not going to lie to all of you. I'm really troubled by the fact that there is a monument to George Floyd in South Minneapolis. And yet the conversation about these children who were shot in the head seems to have already dissipated a couple weeks after the loss of their lives. And I'm struggling with that. And I think we need to recognize again that we need to be pro-justice and pro-safety and law enforcement. They cannot be separate. They cannot be binary. They cannot be exclusive, mutually exclusive. They have to be inclusive, mutually reliant. And we will play a big role, I think, all of us on this call, the business community, and thoughtful people to inspire that. We've got to do better too, and we've got to be more innovative. I think we have got to identify root causes and paddle way further upstream than we ever have before. It sickens me how our police departments, our law enforcement agencies, have to deal with the consequences of bad policy, underinvestment, and injustice. And increasingly, every single police chief I spoke to in my district, which literally in the past 10 days, it was probably over 20 police chiefs, not the entirety, but most of them. Every single one of them shared with me and lamented the significant decrease in applicants for open positions and the significant erosion of the quality of those applicants. So mark my words, my friends, if this continues without supporting law enforcement, we're going to see the kinds of people that we do not want to become police, becoming police. Because if the talent pool, the universe is so shrunk and so few wish to pursue a career in it, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we have to address that right away. And I'm troubled by that. And I'm taking steps to try to ensure that we support police. As for the Congress, we are trying very hard to find some common ground. Way too often the perfect gets in the way of the much improved, which the base of each party is very troubled by. Progressives get on my case. You want everything, and the same thing is on the right. Just obstruct at all costs. We've got to come together on these subjects. If we don't, by the way, all we're doing is ceding power around the globe to countries like Russia and China and other countries with whom we're going to have to play catch up as we sit and yell and squabble and debate and deliberate and don't do anything. So that's my take on this subject, Jonathan. It's not an easy one, but if we do not recapture our streets and ensure safety for everybody, whether you live in North Minneapolis or Plymouth or Roseville or Winona, everybody should enjoy the same safety and security that many of us have known in the suburbs for a long time. It's possible, it's achievable, and we've got to come together, and that takes the right and the left and people of all political perspectives.
Dean, you mentioned something that really struck me as well. The tragic gun violence that impacted 3 of our young people, LaDavion, Trinity, and Anaya. 2 of them tragically lost their lives. One is still fighting for his at North Memorial in the West Metro. The business community did come together and is established now what is a $50,000 reward fund for information in partnership with Crime Stoppers, leading to information to bring those involved to justice. I think we all share that the gravity of the moment and the impact that it's having. And we're partnering with people like Don and Sandra Samuels and others in the community to make sure that we try to stem this tragic gun violence. So I appreciate your leadership on what I will tell you, I think is a top tier issue. as we think about entering into economic recovery, as we think about the future of our city, our region, and our state. I talk to my peers all across the country, as I know you do, and we're all dealing with a global pandemic. Every downtown and every commercial node across the country is trying to figure out how do you go from remote work back to an office environment. What does that look like? What is the future of work? The thing that we have here, the additional work that we have ahead of us is around public safety and around creating a system that is more just and that works for more people. So appreciate the partnership with you on the federal side. We've got a lot of work to do on the state and local side, but I think I share your sentiments that there's a lot of the right leaders around the right tables with the shared resolve that we need to get this right, or we need to at least get better.
And Jonathan, if I just might add one more thing, we can't legislate our way out of everything. And sometimes we can't legislate our way out of anything. I think on this subject, it is incumbent on every one of you and me and this entire business community in the Twin Cities to help us go upstream, absent legislation. And what I mean by that is doing what you can as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as enterprises, to help support the very young people whose lives are at a turning point when they're teenagers. Which direction are they going to go? Idle minds are the devil's playground, as we all know. And if we don't find ways to ignite dreams in young people who do not have the same luxury and blessings of the behavior that many of us had modeled for us in our homes growing up, if we don't do that for them, there's no legislation, there's no gun law, there's no police support, there's no program that's going to do it for us. And when I think about the achievement gap, I also think about the exposure gap. And one way I think we can all make a difference is to take some time and think about how we can get kids out of their challenging circumstances into some of your businesses. Take tours of manufacturing floors and centers and research departments and ad agencies and law firms and restaurants and recording studios and sports arenas, whatever it might be. If we can get kids out of school on a bus to see what is possible, we're going to ignite some dreams. And then you and your volunteer time can each find one of those kids and believe in them. I think that's how we do this. It's not anything terribly innovative. It's simply old-fashioned human care and compassion. And if we really, really want to make a difference, I invite and encourage the chamber to identify ways to take a lead in that and show the rest of the country, perhaps, what this remarkable business community can do when we put our minds to it. I don't see others doing it, and I think we can. I think we know how. It's just a little bit of intention, not a whole lot of money, and would love to work with you all on that.
Thank you for that. I'm going to expand a little bit. I mean, you serve as vice chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. You've talked about that. I think you're proud of that. Yeah, I know we're proud of that. Representative Joachim reminded us that we are the only divided legislature in the country. This is the second cycle that has been the case. But I think, Minnesota really right now is illustrative of this country. We are, to some extent, politically divided. Obviously every other country or every other state in the country has kind of shaken out their politics, at least in the current state, to have, one side, unilaterally governing. Not the case here. And I know that you're experiencing that tension in Congress, and it really is the impetus for the Problem Solvers Caucus. So a couple of thoughts on that and questions. One, what are the most successful strategies that you're seeing evolve and emerge from that? And how is that rubber hitting the road with regards to that work? And are we making progress? What does it look like? And then, I'll tie together a couple of questions we've had from the audience today. One, how do you see the 2022 and 2024 election shaking out? Is the pendulum going to continue to swing to the polls? Are we coming back to some sort of a shared middle ground? Mm-hmm. In all of this, and kind of going back to that conversation we had about the federal stimulus, kind of balancing the federal deficit with debt load and the immediate need to support businesses. All of these things are interconnected. Republicans certainly have a view about what stimulus should look like and what support should look like, and what the debt service should look like. Democrats have a distinctive view. I don't think any of these things are interdependent, so we need to start talking about them in an interconnected way. And I'd love your thoughts connected to the Problem Solvers Caucus and the opportunity that presents for us moving forward.
Well, Jonathan, I'll point out the obvious, which is that just about every single major every major city in the country is deep blue. Just about every single rural district in the country is deep red. And increasingly, every suburban district is purple. Those of you who live in the suburbs, I represent, of course, a suburban district, probably recognize that it's up to us. We are the bridge. We're not going to convince the far left or the far right of much. What we have to do is mobilize the massive number of people who are thoughtful, decent, principled, honorable, compassionate, who see things perhaps differently, but we have to unify if we're going to get things done. And that's what the Problem Solvers Caucus is all about. If we don't break bread together, you're going to break hearts together, surely. And that's the MO of this country right now. And I believe very strongly, just as if you're onboarding in a new enterprise or business, most start by getting people together to get to know each other, to build trust. You do a ropes course and trust one another. You tell your life story over a meal. And you understand through empathy the lens through which your colleagues view the world or view the company or view the strategy. And we should be welcoming divergence of opinion and creating spaces and places for those differing opinions to be vetted and debated and deliberated. It's not rocket science. It's the same lessons every one of us probably learned in kindergarten. So as I look forward prospectively, I'm troubled by both parties, Jonathan. I'm deeply troubled by what I see happening in Minneapolis proper with the city council. I don't want to see that type of a Democratic Party moving forward. And my horror of the right and a growing number of those in the Congress who have so corrupt a principle is equally confounding. Neither are going to be helpful to us moving forward. So once again, those of us who find somewhere in between those extremes, which is most of us, have a responsibility, not just an opportunity, a responsibility to end this nonsense. I believe any extremist should be disenfranchised as it relates to this challenge. And I say disenfranchised with words, not actions. But that means we have to mobilize and find people to serve us in the public sphere who are honorable, principled, decent, and use common sense instead of ideology to address our challenges and identify solutions. That's all I'm trying to do. And I'm frustrated, and I'm not going to lie to all of you. I'm increasingly disgusted, frankly, by what I see on the fringes of both sides. So prospectively, I think the House is probably, if any pundit would tell you right now, likely GOP control after the 2022 midterms, almost exclusively based on redistricting, which I think is a massive problem in our country. The fact that we allow partisan redistricting is nonsense. And by the way, both parties do it. Democrats, when they're in charge, they create districts that are favorable for Democrats. Republicans, of course, gerrymander for Republicans. I want to see independent, nonpartisan redistricting commissions to draw districts that are competitive, that force candidates to broaden their base, to be more mindful of those they represent, and to have to work damn harder to succeed by listening to people rather than just representing their majority, if you will. I also believe in ranked choice voting. I believe it is one of the only mechanisms that we can employ expeditiously and effectively that reward the types of candidates, Democrats and Republicans, who are more moderate. We've seen it in many cities around the country. Not perfect, but more often than not, the most moderate candidate wins. That is true in the city of Minneapolis with our mayor. That is true in the GOP Virginia gubernatorial primary just a few weeks ago, in which the least Trumpy Republican emerged as the nominee. So you see Democrats using it, Republicans using it, and most interestingly, the first two states in the United States to employ ranked choice voting are Alaska and Maine. Not exactly liberal bastions, deeply, fiercely independent states. And I think that actually is what you need to know. If we used ranked choice voting in our elections around the country, you would see third-party candidates emerge and succeed. You would see Democrats and Republicans forced, because of the political incentives, to broaden their base and act more moderately and more cooperatively. I ask you to at least look into it. Those things are actionable. I'm going to be dedicating a lot of my time to those. I'm concerned about the future. There's no question. I'm concerned about the absence of principle and the focus on self-preservation. I've seen too many of my colleagues who I had great faith in the beginning of my term completely forego their honor and their principles in favor of their own careers. And nowhere does that happen more intensely than Congress. So, Jonathan, I'm hopeful. I'm going to keep working for decency and respect and moderation, but that's going to take all of us and all of you. The way we vote has huge implications, and I ask and encourage you to give great thought to how we proceed.
I think you can count us in on that conversation. I want to talk a little bit about taxes. We haven't talked about that much today. You know, we are a corporate headquarters community, as you know. I remind people that most of my talking points over the course of my tenure in this role have included highest per capita Fortune 500 companies in the country, many of them in your district. Just this year added 2 Fortune 5s to the list for the state of Minnesota. So it won't surprise you that a frequent thing that we hear is concern around corporate income tax and taxes generally related to this state. Would love your thinking as the Biden administration explores the future of tax rates as Congress takes this up. Where are you at? Where do you think things are going on the tax front? And what input do you need from our largest companies, our mid-sized companies, our smallest companies in our state and in your district as you inform your thinking on this?
So very distinct, very intentionally and very distinctly, Jonathan, I feel very strongly that first and foremost, as it relates to tax policy, we've got to be competitive, plain and simple. We live in a global economy. People are fighting for corporate headquarters, for manufacturing facilities, for R&D dollars, and for general investment. And if we don't use that lens as our primary lens, we're failing everybody. So competitiveness vis-a-vis other states, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I'm hopeful, based on conversations with many of our allies around the world, that there could be some agreement on a standardized minimum tax for companies, so that we disincentivize, if you will, headquarters relocations for tax purposes. We have to generate revenue if we want to make investments. We spend, I think, very ineffectively and inefficiently in many categories, and I think we should find ways to be more efficient with the use of our dollars. We significantly reduce the corporate tax rate. I favor that. Perhaps not quite as low as it went, but I want us to be competitive. And I'm also deeply dismayed, like probably many of you, when I read accounts of massive successful enterprises like Amazon and its founder and leader, Jeff Bezos, paying so little. And that's something that we got to just consider. If we're not going to find ways in which everybody pays a reasonable share based on their ability, then we're going to be in for a really difficult future, not just economically, but socially. And these are just truths. Democracies fail primarily because of class warfare more than anything else. And I think our tax system has to be looked at with a much more compassionate lens. And that means that people in the very, very, very highest strata of success absolutely have a responsibility. You cannot create that kind of economic success without all of our collective investments in infrastructure, education, and opportunity. And I'm really dismayed by the way that our tax code allows so many to essentially avoid paying tax at all. And that's just the truth. So I want to see small businesses, smaller enterprises have a favorable tax program that rewards people for taking risk and succeeding, and does not punish people who take a risk. That's how we got to look at this. So I believe in competition, competitive rates. I'm not going to lie to all of you too about taxes. Now that I Also have a home in Washington for the time I spend there, and look at how much less I pay on property there than I do here in Minnesota, I'm troubled. I'm not going to lie to you. I want to know better where these dollars are going and what makes us remarkable. I grew up in a Minnesota that I absolutely believed, with its higher tax rate and bigger state investments, made this a better place to live, to work, to raise a family than anywhere in the country. I think it's time to reassess that. I hope that's still the case. I still believe it might be, but I'm not as convinced when I see how other states are becoming so much more competitive than we. So I'm mindful of that. I'm not a state lawmaker. My friend Kelly Morrison, who's on the call, Representative Morrison, is. We have conversations about that. Kelly comes from an extraordinary Minnesota business family. She gets it. She wants to see Minnesota competitive. So we got to work together on this. I don't want to diminish investment in people, communities, and our societal needs, but we have to do so in an effective manner, and we've got to be competitive or we will lose. So that's how I look at this, and I encourage you to share your perspectives with me.
Thanks for that. And indeed, Representative Morrison is a great business leader and a great chamber member. So we appreciate that, as we do all of our chamber members. So I think we have time maybe for two more questions, one a little longer, one probably pretty quick. You talked earlier, Dean, about, and I said it earlier, end of the road with regards to probably blanket federal stimulus during this pandemic. I mean, it certainly could see something else. At the same time, we're having this conversation. The Biden administration is leading on negotiations with Senate Republicans on infrastructure, which I would argue is a great opportunity for additional stimulus, additional job creation, additional infusion of capital and investment all across the country. But it feels like, and I've been tracking this closely, as you would expect, we're at a bit of an impasse. What's your over/under on being able to get something done? I mean, we've talked about a potential infrastructure package of $1 to $2 trillion to modernize our roads and our bridges and our transit system and our broadband. Can we get this thing done?
Yeah. Well, yes, we can. Of course, the question is, will we? I will say this, though. If the Problem Solvers Caucus of 58 of us were the Congress itself, which is how Congress used to operate, it would be done already. We've come to conclusions on a lot of the tough issues, not because we see things the same way, just the opposite. We see things very differently, but our mechanism, our special sauce, is really an old-fashioned sauce, which is just respecting one another and giving opportunity to share perspective and having a place and space to work together. We don't have meetings in Congress. We have hearings, and hearings are not about listening. They're about talking. And as it relates to infrastructure, the Problem Solvers Caucus has a very thoughtful proposal. I'll just run through it real fast. $587 billion for highways, roads, bridges, and safety. $10 billion for community restoration, to restore communities like Rondo and St. Paul that were divided by Highway 94. We have a tradition of building highways and pipelines through communities that had quieter voices, and that has to be rectified. $160 billion for public transit, $25 billion for electric vehicle infrastructure so that we can become a green economy using electric vehicles. $120 billion for passenger rail, including high-speed rail and investments in Amtrak. Anybody who's traveled internationally, if you really want to see how we've ceded leadership, look at rail around the globe, even massive countries like China. We are woefully behind. We are one of the only developed nations in the world without some high-speed rail. And that is, to me, a linchpin of the future. $40-some billion for airports, especially in underserved communities. $26 billion for waterways and ports. Many of our businesses, Cargill, amongst others, that transport goods through our waterways, know how neglected they've been for long. $45 billion for resiliency funds and nature-based infrastructure. And we keep rebuilding the same infrastructure in the same places that are subject to the same natural disasters that are increasing because of climate change. We have to become more resilient. $5 billion for asset recycling, $45 billion for broadband. Again, the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America, can't figure out a way to ensure that everybody has high-speed internet. And it's 2021. We did electrification in the 1930s, for goodness sakes. Come on, America. it's time to do so. COVID laid very bare the discrepancies in access, not just rural access, even urban access. If we want to be competitive, we want young people to have possibility and opportunity. We've got to have them, we got to have high-speed internet for them. $72 billion for drinking water, water infrastructure, wastewater, Western storage in the West. Our water systems in many cases are woefully old and at risk, and have to make investments in that. And then $71 billion for energy, including a better electric grid for green energy transmission, and to bring our grid into the 21st century. Lastly, $10 billion for veterans housing. One of my personal objectives is to ensure that every veteran in America has a roof over his or her head. And that is part of infrastructure too. So we've come to that conclusion. The pay-fors are a little bit more complicated, Jonathan, but that's about $1.2 trillion. We believe it significantly will bring us up into the, maybe not the 21st century yet, but at least the 20th century vis-a-vis our competitors. And if we don't do it, it is just a massive and disgusting and unforgivable failure of leadership. And when I say that, that's both sides of the aisle.
So we've covered a lot of ground. One of the things that I appreciate most about you, Congressman, is you never shy away from the tough questions. We've had those today, but I am going to hand you a softball as we close out our time together. We've got business leaders, from across your district and across the state with us today. Others will see this in the days ahead. It is recorded and will be published. What advice and ask do you have for us as a business community, as you do your work, as we do this shared work as job creators, thinking about an economic recovery that positions your district, our region, our state for that future that you talked about growing up through and that I grew up through as a Minnesotan? What do you need from us? And I'd ask you to do that in 60 to 90 seconds.
I'll make it fast, Jonathan, and quite simply. First, determine if we want to be collectively part of the solution. And if the answer to that question is yes, and I sure as heck hope it is, to use this extraordinary collection of people and enterprises that comprise the chamber membership to start creating some working groups, investigate the issues that are most troubling to us here in the Twin Cities and around the country, whether it's public safety, housing, economic opportunity, education, healthcare, you name it, and come up with solutions. No one, no group, no collection of people is better prepared to do so than all of you. You are the best, the brightest, the most talented, the innovators, the ideators. That is not the United States Congress. In fact, the big problem is we don't get enough of your ideas. In fact, they are imposed on you by people who have often no experience. And most importantly, Jonathan, our kids. If you want to ensure safety, security, prosperity for our country and the world moving forward, please find ways to help our kids in our community who do not have the blessing of parents who are modeling the behavior that they need to succeed. The only way we are going to address that is with all of you taking some step to help them. And I encourage us to work together to that end. The solution will not be legislated. It will be human to human contact, belief in one another, and opportunities that all of you might provide to those who simply need a door opened. They don't know how to even knock on the door. I ask that you open it for them, find them, cultivate them, nurture them, mentor them, and do what the government simply can't do or won't do. That is my call to action for all of you. And if we do so, not only will we all succeed, every one of us, I think we will be the national leaders in bringing us into the 21st century as a compassionate, hopeful, optimistic, and just United States of America.
Well, Dean, I want to thank you for being here today, for your partnership in this work, for your friendship. I can tell folks on this call, he never hesitates to answer my call. You talked earlier about thoughtful discourse and the need for it. We've had some of that over the course of the years, and I really value that partnership and the work ahead. So appreciate the work that you and your team are doing. Grateful to Representatives Youakim and Morrison for joining us this morning, and for all of the work that both of you do on behalf of our district, our business community, and our state. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grace Waltz to wrap us up.
Thanks, everybody.
Jonathan, and I echo my thanks to Congressman Phillips and Representatives Joachim and Morrison for joining us this morning. Just a couple of quick notes on upcoming programming. Our next Issues and Insights legislative breakfast will be focused on transit, and that will be on Friday, July 16th, and it will be in person. So more details to come on that. And the 36th annual West Metro Golf Classic will be Monday, July 26th at Burl Oaks Golf Club. So make sure you get your foursome registered now, and hopefully this heat wave will have ended by then. Again, thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors, and thank you as well to all of you for being here. Enjoy your weekend, and we hope to see you soon.